Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for more cooperation in digital transformation and developing the digital economy. That was in his address to the third session of the 17th group of G20. So, of course, this is the group of the world's biggest, most industrialized nations, but South Africa is there. The Leaders Summit in Bali in Indonesia is taking place. And for more on this, we cross to our SABC correspondent, Richard Kimber. Richard, tell us more about this call.
That's right. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa was part of that session this Wednesday afternoon. It was really the final session that took place here at the G20 before the issue of the Poland missile incident really took over proceedings here. But during that digital transformation session, it was a key opportunity for leaders from around the world, particularly from smaller nations here at the G20, to get an insight into the type of technological innovations that are taking place among the biggest nations here at the G20. And that's all part of this process that the host country here, Indonesia, has been pushing, trying to help the smaller nations that make up the G20 get more access to the technology at the top of the tree, if you like. That's been one of the key tenets of this G20, an effort from Indonesia's President Joko Widodo to try to rebalance things somewhat in favor of the smaller participants at the G20. And with regards to Africa specifically, this is one key talking point here at the G20 this year, a way to try and get more representation for developing countries, particularly African nations, at the table at the G20. There's been specific talk of requests to have a G21 as soon as next year, even possibly, with an additional permanent delegate seat for an African Union leader. And this is significant for South Africa, who so far, and this year in particular, has to a certain extent been relied upon by other African nations to try and provide their voice at the G20 summit.
All right, and then Richard, you said that the attack in Poland that killed 2 is overtaking events somewhat. I mean, how is this overshadowing issues? Of course, it's all about Russia's culpability and whether NATO gets more involved in or not in the war in Ukraine.
Well, certainly today's proceedings, the last day of the G20 summit, has really been overrun with discussions over how to respond to this missile explosion in Poland. The leaders of the G7 countries, the biggest countries that are part of the G20, they held an emergency roundtable meeting early this morning, laying aside all of their other bilateral meeting responsibilities in order to make that possible, just to try and formulate an initial response plan. Some 12 or even 14 hours now later, there's still no formal joint communique, no formal announcement from those G7 leaders laying blame on any single part, nor explaining exactly what they believe to have happened. It's only now that we're starting to get more individual confirmations from either individual states or indeed from NATO. The chief there, Jens Stoltenberg, starting to suggest, without formally concluding, that this was not fired by Russia. Russia has denied this all along, but there's not been a clear sense yet as to where else the missile may have came from. NATO now is suggesting that it may have been a Ukrainian defense missile that was actually responsible for landing on the Polish side of the border. And this is something that's still being investigated now, and many other G7 leaders here during the course of today have been reluctant to point the finger anywhere in an effort to try and de-escalate this from turning into something bigger and then causing even more global tensions as a result.
Well, please follow those big global developments for us. Thank you very much, Richard Kimber, reporting live from Bali in Indonesia.